Hello and welcome to Mr. Mike's World, where smiles grow on trees. So this is our first video and I'm very excited. This is over chapter 3, which is about Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent. Now the first thing we're going to talk about is the geography of the Fertile Crescent. So a long time ago, people would move places where they could farm. And the best place they could farm was near rivers. Rivers would occasionally flood, and then the waters would kind of go back into the river, and it would make the soil next to the river really good for farming. So that's where people moved. Now there was one place called Mesopotamia, which was really good for farming because it was in between two rivers. Mesopotamia actually means between two rivers. And Mesopotamia was actually part of a larger area that is shown here in green, known as the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent is just a large area that is good for farming. It is surrounded by the desert. Now, hunter-gatherer groups first settled in Mesopotamia more than 12,000 years ago. They eventually learned how to plant crops and grow their own food by farming. So every year there would be a flood from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which brought silt. Silt is a combination of soil and tiny rocks, and this would make the land perfect for farming. Now around 7000 BC, farmers began to farm wheat, barley, and grain, and they also ate fish, birds, and livestock. Because they started getting so much food, civilizations developed. Now, we're going to be going over pages 56 and 57 about farming and cities in class. If you want, you can skim it over right now, but here are some highlights. First, Mesopotamians used irrigation, which is a way of supplying water to an area of land. Then they used canals, which are human-made waterways, and they used these canals to control the river flow. So now we are in section 2. And in southern Mesopotamia, there were some people who created a civilization. These people are known as the Sumerians. And they created the first civilization that had thousands of people. And this place was called Sumer. Most people in Sumer were farmers, and they lived in rural areas, which just means the countryside. The center of the city, though, was called urban areas. By 2000 BC, there were 100,000 people in Sumer. So for the government, they created what was called a city-state. A city-state consists of a city and all the countryside around it. And the bigger the city-state, the bigger the land that the city-state controlled. In order to protect themselves, these city-states built strong walls around the city, kind of like the one here in Jerusalem. The biggest city-states during this time were Kish, Uruk, and Ur. And Uruk had a king named Gilgamesh, who became a really important person in Sumerian literature. There was another society that was around Mesopotamia. It was the Akkadian society, and in 2300 BC, the king of the Akkadians, Sargon, decided to build a capital near what is now Baghdad. He created an army and attacked the people around him. They conquered all of the Fertile Crescent and created the first empire, which is a land with different territories and peoples under one government. This empire lasted about 150 years. Religion was also very important to the Sumerians. They practiced polytheism, which is the worship of many gods. And each city-state had one main god that they worshipped, and these gods they thought had a lot of power. So they had priests who were able to perform religious ceremonies, and this was just in order to get on the good side of the gods. Now, some people were more important than others. There was a social hierarchy, which was the division of society by rank or class. Kings were the most important, and then priests, and then there were craftspeople, merchants, and people who traded. Then there was the working class, and then they had slaves. Really, for women, only wealthy people were sometimes educated. Now we're going to be reading over pages 65 through 67 in class. And so we're going to move on to page 68. And we're on section 3 now. And we're talking about the Sumerians, how creative they were in their art, architecture, and metalwork. Architecture is the science of building.
most rulers lived in large palaces, and the rich people lived in big houses. But most people, just average people, lived in small houses with 6 small rooms around a courtyard. And they built these houses mainly out of mud bricks. The city centers always had a temple, which was always the biggest and best building in the city. A ziggurat is a pyramid-shaped temple tower, which looks like this. It was in every city. There was always a shrine to a god at the top. Sumerians also made great art. There were a lot of statues made of gods, pottery, jewelry with earrings, and they made great music. But the most famous thing they made were cylinder seals. You took these seals and rolled them over clay, which would leave an imprint like this. This showed that whatever had the seal belonged to you.
So we're on to chapter 3, section 4. And we're talking about people who lived in the Fertile Crescent after everyone we've just talked about. Now, Sargon lived in Uruk, and he grew this powerful empire. After he died, the land of Ur became very, very powerful. Ur, it spells Ur. So at about 2000 BC, though, Ur was completely destroyed.
The biggest city that came up was called Babylon, and Hammurabi was its king. He would become the greatest monarch, which is a ruler of a kingdom or empire. Now, Hammurabi was an awesome war leader. He took over all of Mesopotamia and called it the Babylonian Empire. He oversaw tons of building projects. He created a better way to collect taxes, and he helped make the people of Babylon very rich. But the most important thing he did was called Hammurabi's Code, which was a set of 282 laws, which dealt with almost every part of daily life. There were laws on trade, what to do with criminals, marriage, and many other things. People everywhere could look at Hammurabi's Code and see what was illegal. This was really important because, as far as we know, this was the first time something like this had ever happened.
Now, eventually, Hammurabi died, and when that happened, soon after, the Babylonians lost most of their power. And during class, we'll go over the invasions on Mesopotamia and the Phoenicians, and that's in pages 74 through 77. If you want right now, you can skim through it. So that does it for chapter 3. I hope you had a good time in Mr. Mike's world, and I will see you next time.